But there is this place. Station yourself on the rock, God says to Moses, and as my presence passes by, sure sounds like a physical presence to me, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by. And then I will take my hand away and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen.
There's a book about that. It's called God's Phallus.
Yeah, I'm vaguely familiar with that book. I wasn't going to mention it, but since you did, it's okay. But you know, there's another book, by the way, a little older than that. Scholars date it to about the 3rd, 4th, 5th century, and it's called Shi'ur Koma, which means the measure. Right? Shi'ur Koma.
You don't mean the one where he's measured in millions of miles of height.
Yeah, that's it, Ann. Yeah. See, you haven't read the book, have you?
No, I just read about it.
It's really wild. Hard to get, especially in English. Although my colleague Martin Cohen did a translation and commentary and another volume just on all the related issues. But that was, you know, it's like, so like God's little finger is like 18 trillion, you know, measures of whatever.
Parasangs, maybe.
Parasangs, that's a good note. That's a good term. You know, parasang is about 3 normal miles. So, you know, that's God's little finger. The whole purpose of it was to convey the idea that
what? He's
God
really
was
big.
Totally beyond comprehension. But yes, God had measurements, right? So, you know, okay. So I was sort of prepared for this after reading a little bit about Shi'ur Koma years ago. But what are the things that they meant? What are the things that some of the commentators understood about this? And what do we make of it? You know, we who live in a time when we don't usually think of God in physical terms. So this is, you know, this is what we're going to talk about tonight. So Rashi comments on this verse. It says, on the mountain where I always speak to you, Moses, there is a place ready for me for your need where I will hide you so that you shall not be harmed through experiencing my presence. So here's Rashi writing, you know, a couple thousand years after the text of the Torah, in whatever form it originally existed, comes into being.
2,500 years.
How does Rashi make sense out of this?
He figured that Moses and Hashem could touch each other. And if they did, Moses would be in trouble. So he protected him.
So I think Rashi is muting God's physical presence just a little bit. All right. Yeah, Nick.
I think he's trying to find a way that Moses and God can connect to each other in a way that, or in a manner that we can understand.
Yeah.
He's trying to personalize it in a sense.
Yeah, and it's not the same as, you know, I can, you know, I will, you will see my back, but not my face. And it's like, it's a way of saying, I'll keep you protected while still experiencing a sense of closeness, maybe not union, mystical union, that idea comes a little later, but closeness.
But surely the biblical writer had in mind the whole physical deal, that he was right there and he could be harmed by his physical presence.
Yes. Rashi, in my judgment, is slightly uncomfortable with, I want to say the full Monty, but that's kind of sacrilegious.
No.
So, but Rashi doesn't want to go, 100% on God having a physical presence. Yes, Nick.
Well, that goes against one of his 13 principles of Judaism, that God is incorporeal, that he doesn't have a physical form, right? And since he wrote that, he doesn't want
Maimonides' 13 principles.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sorry.
No. Yes, okay. Absolutely. But, Maimonides, who is thoroughly imbued with Aristotelian philosophy, he will not accept even the slightest anthropomorphism, any sense of God having a physical presence. So, the idea of a Judaism based on principles, whether it's 10 or 13 or 613 or whatever, that is not present in the Bible. There is no such thing as a catechism. Although interestingly, in the 19th century, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch of Germany said that the catechism of the Jew is our calendar. Right?
I thought you were going to say it was the Amida.
Nope. He says it's the calendar, the things that you do on weekdays, the things that you do on Shabbat, the things that you do on holidays. Those are the things that really teach us what to believe. They instruct us how to understand God or how to understand ourselves and how we need to, get on with life in this world.
How do you say, what's the word for believe in Latin? They don't just call it a catechism, they call it the belief or something. Anyway.
I don't know, my Latin's a little rusty, Anne.
In the days of the Second Temple, there were all kinds of beliefs running around. Yeah. And all of them were okay. I mean, they disagreed with each other, but nobody excommunicated each other on the basis of beliefs because they had the temple to unify them.
Well, if you're just talking about the Jews, yes, they usually...
Yeah, I'm talking about the Jews.
They usually manage to get along. But the spiritual marketplace was a little more limited until the temple was destroyed. And, it was around that same time that Christianity was coming into its own. And so the spiritual marketplace definitely widens out there. And it's not just Jews. It's like we have to have a way of expressing our faith in the marketplace and even selling it to others. Of course, in that time, there was a lot of conversion. There was a ton of conversion in Rome.
10% of the Romans were converted to Jews.
Yeah, and some people put it higher. It gradually tapered off, but really it didn't end until Constantine.
Constantine made it illegal.
Yes, and dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go to the next midrash, right? From Breshit Rabbah. There is a place near me, right? When God says that to Moses, he says that refers to the location of the Shekhinah, the divine presence. It says the place is with me, but not I am in the place. The world is not God's location, but the Holy One is the location of the world.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, what is it that's good about that, Anne?
Well, it enables us to see those of us who want to see God as being more than a body can, and it also tells you why, if you go in the sky or a spaceship, you ain't going to see him, because he's not in our universe at all. The universe is in him, and that takes care of that.
Yeah, so never mind finding God, because the world is in God. You are in God. And you see that expressed frequently in Hasidic texts, and other mystical texts as well. Other comments or questions? All right, so let's take a look at this piece from Rabbi Meir Shapira of Lublin, who, by the way, became famous for inventing the Daf Yomi program. Okay?
Ooh.
Yeah, so there is a place near me. That's the verse, right? The text continues and speaks of my presence, right? The nearness of heaven. And God tells Moses, station yourself on the rock, meaning live at such a level that you will be like a rock for that which is for God's sake. And as my presence passes by, meaning when a moment for God's presence will pass by and it involves your own honor, I will place you in the cleft of the rock, meaning put yourself in the cleft and make yourself humble. Okay? So, this is a whole reinterpretation of this piece. Right? It totally takes the physical nature of God out of discussion. Right? It's a nice sermon. Right? Is it what the text of the Bible says? No, but lots of sermons are like that. Okay? Station yourself on the right, live at a level where you will be like a rock for what matters. Okay? And when God's presence pass by, put yourself in the cleft and make yourself humble before God.
Turn the Torah and turn it, for everything is in it.
I didn't know this was in it, but yeah, it's a nice piece, that, for some of us, where does God live? God lives in the models of people who represent God's concern, the people who make you feel that you haven't been forgotten. Their closeness helps many people feel God's closeness. Mm-hmm. And then there's the last part of that: make yourself humble, right? Humility before what really inspires. Right? So the answer to the question, where is God? You have three very different answers. Right? But so for many of us, we might ask ourselves, where do you feel the divine presence? Right?
The Kotzker
Where's
knew.
the place that you feel closest to God?
The Kotzker knew.
Well, the Kotzker said, God is present wherever you let him in. Yeah. But, just looking at it from another angle, if you don't, if you let God in all the time, then where do you feel most accessible?
In the mountains.
Okay.
Lots of people felt that way in ancient times. Maybe
that's one. Well, maybe that's why the Torah was given on a mountain. It's not a big mountain. Kind of like a big hill.
It was a humble mountain. Yeah, come on, y'all. and somebody disagree.
And you're wrong about everything else you're going to say tonight, so you can argue with me, even if you're right. When you say amazing things sometimes, is that what you want? I'm just kidding. What if you're right, Anne? Why should we have to disagree with you?
Well, you can agree if you want to, but thanks.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I miss you too.
Agree or disagree, it may or may not help you, Nick. So let's take a look at this little piece from the Psalm, right?
Oh, that's
and ask yourself where this fits in among the models that we've seen so far. The psalmist says, God, you are my God. I search for you. My soul thirsts for you. My body yearns for you like a parched and thirsty land that has no water. I shall behold you in the sanctuary and see your might and glory.
That is beautiful.
Well, you know,
it's very sexy.
You know, when he says, I shall behold you in the sanctuary, where's he talking from?
His palace?
That's not the sanctuary.
No, the sanctuary is the temple. Well, that had to be
right
written after Solomon's time.
So, you know, for a lot of people, I would imagine the temple had this kind of, you know, powerful effect. You know, this is the place where at least even if you couldn't see God, and I think some people believe that they did see God in the temple, at least God's might and glory were there, right? There's a comment in someone who wrote a book about Psalms, and this is also the guy I mentioned before, Martin Cohen. He says, the light of God will shine forth from the Holy of Holies if those gathering in the temple court can draw it out.
Oh, that's almost like saying wherever you let him in.
Yeah. So the connection is there. All you have to do is plug in. That seems good. You know, that's easy. If plugging in is easy. I don't know about that. But, and by the way, even after the temple was in ruins for a long, long time, the power of this imagery apparently affected many people, because Muhammad had a vision of a nighttime journey on his horse to Jerusalem. And he got to the Temple Mount and he stood on the rock, and it says he soared up to heaven.
Didn't he have a horse?
Well, apparently.
Which is interesting because Jerusalem's not listed as any site of holy significance in the Quran itself.
No, but that's why they built the Dome of the Rock.
Yeah.
And they built it right where the temple was on purpose.
What a shock.
Soak up the holiness.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. So it's a power deal also, Nick, but still, if he has that kind of vision at that kind of place, maybe it had a similar effect, or, just knowing what it meant to the Jews in ancient times, as people in that part of the world probably did. Right? Other comments or questions? Okay, so want to show you this little piece from the Talmud. This is, if you haven't seen this text before, you really have to see it. Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, who might have been the Kohen Gadol, or it might just have been his imagination, said, I once entered the innermost part of the temple to offer incense, right? Because only the Kohen Gadol could do that. And I saw Akatriel Yah, the Lord of hosts, sitting on a high and exalted throne. He said to me, Ishmael, my son, bless me. I responded, rabbis are never never at a loss for words, right? Even if God says, give me a bracha, the rabbi always has something. And so what does he say? This is great. By the way, independent of anything else in this text, this is great. May it be your will that your mercy overcome your anger and your mercy prevail over your other attributes, so you deal with your children compassionately and be more gracious to them than the law demands. And he nodded his head to me. Okay? And, by the way, we learn from this that the blessing of an ordinary individual should not be taken lightly. Okay?
That reminds me of what I've heard some Christians say. They say the reason that Jesus was needed to attain forgiveness for people for their sins was because God's justice is so stringent that it will not allow him to be merciful, even if he wants to.
Yeah. So from a Jewish standpoint, we would say that's a bunch of bull.
Yes.
Right. So, I didn't want to offend all the Christians on this call, but, sorry. So just, a lot of odds and ends on this text. So first of all, if you've not seen this text before, you probably don't know this name. That, God has many, many different names. This one is Akatriel Yah. Akatriel comes from the word keter, which is crown. So this is like, the crown of God. So this is a vision of God. Big,
being king.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's on a throne and he's got a crown.
Yes. And, there's, there's no angel in this story. No angel would bother to ask a human being for a bracha. Okay? And by the way, it turns out that there is also a document that was discovered in the Cairo Geniza, probably 1,000 years old or more, that clearly reads Akatriel Yah as a name of God. Okay? And where does this happen? Well, he went into the Holy of Holies, the innermost part of the temple. Okay? So could only be the Kohen Gadol. Okay? Unfortunately, there is no record of a Kohen Gadol by the name of Yishmael ben Elisha. Right? There was an Elisha. There was a sage named Yishmael ben Elisha, but there was no Kohen Gadol by that name. So might have been a vision, might have been a dream, might have been they got the names mixed up. We do not know. Okay? There's also a parallel text to this from one of the Hechalot books, produced somewhere between the 2nd and the 8th century. They're very, very difficult to date. But it definitely dates from the post-temple period. Right? So the text, whatever it is, we don't see this text. We don't know this text in any context that existed in the time of the temple, but it might have been reported and recorded later on. So it's definitely directed with the temple, right? The Holy of Holies was, that was the seat of the divine presence. So that's where you would go if you were going to visualize God better than any other place. And granted, probably there were people in the temple who thought that they saw God, or had a vision of God or something like that. But the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kodeshim, that's where you would really go to encounter God, right? So, and what happens here? Yishmael ben Elisha, he influences God's qualities, right? He's doing the same thing without all the Kabbalistic jargon as the Kabbalists later tried to do. Because for the Kabbalists, their job, they felt, was not to become better people, but to help God fulfill what God needed, whether it was what God needed for God's self or for the world or whatever. Most of us think of religion as having the end of, trying to make us better people. And while the Kabbalists never denied that that was a good thing, they said, it's so not about you, right? It's about, how you help God create what God needs. Right?
Well, that sounds as if they're very unselfish.
Yes. So here, Yishmael ben Elisha is like a forerunner of the Kabbalists because he's trying to have an effect on the inner life of God, right? And it's not, not only does God want that, God asks for it, right? So who knows, maybe God is asking us to do certain things for him, for God, and not necessarily for, whatever we need.
So he needs us not to eat pork.
Yeah, but why? And usually when we give reasons for the mitzvot, we say, so we set aside something in order to be holier, or there's something that helps us achieve more discipline, the ability to say no. I've given that sermon too, right? But here in the mystical view, it's not about making you better. It's however it is, for whatever reason, it's what God needs. Now, I'm not asking you to believe that. I'm just telling you that that's a view that has definitely had its day and continues to have its day in communities such as the Hasidic world, where the mystical view is more prevalent.
Tikkun olam.
Well, but with a specific definition.
Doing the mitzvah.
Most of us today, when we use the word tikkun olam, it's, like making the world a better place. That's what we do when we're recycling, right? We recycle because it's tikkun olam. And when the Kabbalists mean it, when the mystics say tikkun olam, what they mean is correcting some flaw in the universe in order to help God put the universe right.
Well, yeah, that's what it had to mean when they started out.
No, that's not what it mean when they started, when the mystics started out, yes. But in the Mishnah and the Talmud, where the text is first used, it's more like, tikkun olam is like the common good. It's like, don't litter, right?
Derech Eretz?
Make sure it's almost like Derech Eretz. Derech Eretz is like one step more mundane than Tikkun Olam. There's a long article on the misuse of the term Tikkun Olam. I don't know that it's really misused. It's just like a lot of things, it's also been recycled and reinterpreted.
Well, Manus Friedman tells about occasionally in his speeches online that he encountered a Christian who said, are you saved? And he says, well, why am I concerned with me? My concern is to serve God. And according to his story, the Christian said, oh, I never thought of that. And burst into tears because he realized that would be better. I don't know what happened really. I just know how he tells the story.
It's interesting coming from someone in Chabad, which generally teaches service to other people as a means of serving God, because the divine image is in every person. Which, by the way, and that's pretty good Judaism too. All right, so I'm going to skip this lengthy piece by Ilana Kershaw, but I would say, read it on your own and, think about it. I actually had a webinar with her today. She's a fabulous teacher. And this is she tells a very personal story and puts this into a whole different light, this text from Brachot. But we're gonna go on for lack of time and go to this text from Masechet Yoma in the Jerusalem Talmud. Okay? For 40 years, Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the Just, served Israel as Kohen Gadol. And the last year he said to them, this year I will die. They said to him, no, how do you know? And he told them, every year when I've entered into the Holy of Holies, there was an old man dressed and wrapped in white who entered and exited with me. But this year he entered with me, but did not exit with me. Rabbi Abahu told them, he said it was a man. I say it was the Holy One.
Well, something was different.
Yeah, well, it does suggest that God is experienced visibly, at least by the Kohen Gadol in the Holy of Holies. Right? And here again, the meeting place is the Holy of Holies in the temple. Right? What makes the temple that kind of access point for God? What is it about the temple? Right? We use the word hamakom, which literally means the place, but we use that as another name of God. Right? Hamakom is one of many names for God in Jewish tradition. So, what is it about this place, this makom, where God is so intensely experienced? Was.
Maybe it's a matter of focus.
Is it, this is where you put God into focus.
Yeah, that's what I think. Because it's such a common area that's used. Perhaps that's why it was so profound.
What?
It was commonly used, so it was. And clearly, if you went to the temple with a certain expectation, you're more likely to fulfill that expectation there. And I guess this, a lot of people today go to the Kotel, the Western Wall that remains from the temple. And for whether they expect it or not, they are awed by it. And they often have a very intense emotional experience or spiritual experience. And they say, this is where I experienced a certain sense of closeness with God. And the only word I know of for that in Hebrew is the word devekut, which means cleaving. Okay? That was where they felt that they cleaved to God. So maybe it was even more intense back in the day. Right? Comments or questions up to here? Okay. Let's take this next text in. All right. This from Midrash Breshit Rabbah. All right. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak, that's a mouthful, asked Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, I've heard you know a lot of Agada. So you tell me, from where was the original light created? And Shmuel bar Nachman gives it the interpretation, which, we see this interpretation a few places in the rabbinic tradition. It says, the verse teaches us that the Holy One, praised be He, wrapped himself in this original light as in a robe and irradiated with the luster of his majesty the whole world from one end to the other. This is why nobody was supposed to be able to see that light, because, it would be like radioactivity. It would burn you out. Okay? Now, when Shmuel bar Nachman says this to him, he says it to him in a whisper. Why is he whispering? Rabbi Shimon says, well, there's a verse that says that. In the Psalm, it says he was wrapped in a robe of light. So why are you whispering? What's the big secret? And he says, I heard it that way, so I told it to you that way. And Rabbi Berechia, who is, listening in about this, says if Rabbi Yitzchak had not expounded this in public, you couldn't say it. Right? So, and how did this discussion all start? The Midrash says Rabbi Berechia said, in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, right, the light was created from the place of the temple, as it is written, and behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the east with a roar like the roar of mighty waters, and the earth was lit up by his glory, from Ezekiel. And his glory always refers to the temple. Right? As it is said, verse in Jeremiah, O throne of glory exalted from of old, our sacred shrine. So here's one guide to try to help us understand what the temple was all about for us. This is where the divine light came from. This is the place of God's throne, right? God's, and that's why the temple gets built there. And that's why the light shines from there. Right? That throne, that place, They are the model for the dwelling place that is in the higher world. Right? Now, yes, there's a higher world, but certain things in that world are mirrored in this world and vice versa. So the temple has that mirroring effect of God's dwelling place above. And that's why some would say, or would have said, that God can be seen there. Why is it taught in a whisper? Right? Well, you know, this is really critical stuff. We don't play around with this. We're not going to, tell this to everybody, to just anybody. This is dynamite. And that's why you have to do it in a whisper. All right? So, the amazing thing is that this midrash actually made it into the written midrash, because, if they have to whisper it to each other, why is it that they wrote it down and put it in the text of the, Midrash Rabbah? So, the truth is that that's a question you could ask about a number of these texts. Somebody who meets God in the Holy of Holies and God asks him to give him a blessing, right? That's, I think if I got up in the pulpit and said, everybody, I want you to know, I had a visit with God here. I stood in front of the ark last week and I saw God. I don't know if everybody would take that the right way. And
maybe not.
I think that, some of my retirement might be made a little more permanent. So, but the thing is, it does creep into the texts, because these matters, as highly charged as they are, you can't keep them out completely. They bring a lot of energy into Jewish life. And so the idea that one can see God or have, let's say, an intense experience of the divine presence, right? You can't read that out of Judaism so easily. I know Maimonides tried, but Maimonides also couldn't do it completely. And in fact, he also believed in Dveikut, in a intense spiritual feeling of closeness with God. He just said that God wasn't in any way a physical being. Right? When you had that experience, you were having it with, a spiritual being. But here, people are experiencing it, live and in person, right? So, as crazy as some of the mystical texts may seem, you got to give them a hearing in Judaism, because if you don't, there are a substantial number of people who will look elsewhere for those kinds of experiences. And I think, there are a lot of Jewish people in my lifetime who have gone somewhere else because they didn't know that you could have an experience of closeness with God and that was consistent with Judaism. They just didn't know. And, we certainly don't teach it, particularly in our religious schools and our day schools. And so what if, you know, when people are actually looking for that, it's tragic that they don't know that we have it, because we often lose them. Okay. Comments or questions?
What do you do to be sure that they will know about it?
Well, you have to expose them to it, at least to some degree.
Well, we can't just count on a class like what we have. We've got to have it mentioned, as you say, in the day schools or in the Sunday schools.
Okay.
Early on.
Well,
in kindergarten.
I think kindergarten is a good place to start. But, you know, I think high school is also a really good place to teach about this stuff. You know, I wouldn't go into a high school class and ask them, you know, do you believe in God? Right? I have a pretty good idea what answer I might get. But I could ask, have any of you ever had a feeling of being close to God? And then we could talk, and I, you know, when I've done that over the years, usually I get some response. And then we can talk about some of those experiences if they're willing to talk about them. Some experiences are just too intense to put into words. And I found that too. But you know, I think you know, if I were teaching a class of 9th and 10th graders, that'd be a good place to ask the question. Have you ever had a time when you felt close to God?
Have you ever discussed this with the board or with the other rabbis?
Not my charge. I don't generally go to board meetings. I'm not invited to board meetings. But, you know, it's the sort of thing I did when I was the rabbi of a congregation. You know, if I was teaching a class, although I would say I've done it more as the years went by. The more I appreciated the power in it, the more likely I was to do it in a classroom. Again, I mean, you know, I wouldn't do it in every classroom. There are some that where, you know, that would be like throwing a bomb in there.
How can you tell?
You get a feel, you know, and you've taught in college, right? You get a feel for your classes.
Well, I said some rather outrageous things, and I was surprised at how welcoming they were to.
Well, yeah, sure, ideas. Because you know, it's fine in certain settings and with certain people. But every so often, you know, you throw a bomb into the room, and it'll blow you up. I too have been blown up in class. Especially, you know, I taught a confirmation class one year. You know, every week was a bomb. But, you know, sometimes that's the way it is. You don't get to choose.
What about this class? You want to ask us?
Sure. Let's throw that onto the table. Have any of you had an experience of feeling closeness with God?
Yeah, a couple times.
Uh-huh. Anything that you can describe about it?
It was like as if your mother called your name, and because you know it's her. Uh-huh. It was that type of experience. It was, without question, I knew exactly who it was.
Uh-huh.
It was kind of shocking.
You said something to me once remarkably like what Nick just said.
Who said something like what
you did? Said? You did.
Oh, yes, I had a strange experience, in particular, about a year ago.
Oh, was it? But you define it as a strange experience.
Well, it's not like other experiences.
Okay, so we're getting near the end of our time, but I want to.
What was the one you had in mind? What did I say?
I'm not going to go into detail about your experience, but I will say that over the years, I have had a number of people from my congregations come to me and describe having had some sort of spiritual experience, something that made them feel intensely close to God. And more than once, the person who told me of this experience said to me, asked me, Rabbi, am I crazy? Now, theoretically, I could have said, well, yes, but they have medicine for that. Because I didn't want to do that, and I didn't want to belittle their experience, even if I questioned it, I didn't say, no, I didn't say, yes, you're crazy. Of course not. I asked for more data if they had any. I came to understand that there was a lot of this going around, more than we commonly talk about in the synagogue. So I think that's it's something that I was never taught when I was in religious school, when I was in youth group, and really not in rabbinical school either. But
I'm really surprised, really, because you studied mysticism for your PhD, right?
Yeah, that was later though. I was in rabbinical school in the 70s. Now, rabbinical schools are different today. And yes, there's a lot more. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a major, although the Ziegler School in Los Angeles, where Rabbi Fort was ordained, has for some years had a concentration in Kabbalah and Hasidism. There's a lot more of that taught than there was in the 70s, which is not saying much because we never were taught anything about Kabbalah and Hasidism in rabbinical school. And I dare say that was true in other rabbinical schools too.
What's the name of that teacher of yours who's so wonderful and died a couple of years ago?
Dr. Byron Sherwin.
Yes. Did you ever discuss this with him?
Yeah, sure.
Well, so then
it's one of the reasons why I did my doctoral project as I did, because I felt that it was a good idea to have not just mystical experience, but an organized curriculum about mysticism as it evolved in the Jewish tradition. All right, thank you all very much. We'll see you, I hope, next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Everybody stay well.
Good night.
Yep.
Be well, be healthy, be safe.
Good night.